Hey TV fans, Bored Now back with you. On this video I'm going to be talking about a murder at the end of the world. It's episode 6 and it is called Crime Scene. Nice little play on words there. So full spoilers once again. This is the penultimate episode. And things are ramping up very nicely for the finale next week. We do get some concrete answers when it comes to the main mystery, or at least we appear to. It's still a little in doubt at the end of the episode who the actual killer is, who killed Bill, who killed the other pair. But at the moment, strong indications then it could be Andy. Certainly Darby is still thinking him, but that makes me think maybe not, because that could be too obvious. And Lee does bring up a good point of why it possibly wouldn't be Andy at some point. But to pick up from the start of, or the end of last week's episode, the cliffhanger where Darby was sort of suckered out to the swimming pool and somebody mysteriously left the thing on, like closed the top, and she was in peril. Now, it appears as though it may not have been somebody, then it could have been another hack in the system, because it's once again suggested then it may be operated by AI, so that's something which they discuss. But Lee and David save Darby at the start of this, so I'm not quite sure if we're meant to assume then though they were the two people who Darby could see, like from the swimming pool, but it may just be whoever did it. But there's talk of it being an AI and maybe a hack once again, which could explain a lot of what's been happening in any case. But they save Darby, they take her back to the room, and Darby once again is a little in and out of consciousness, not in the right headspace, but she's trying to make out what Lee and David are saying to each other. So once again, it's all from her point of view, so it's a little fuzzy from our point of view as well. But we can see that Lee and David seem to be pretty close because they're hugging. And at first my mind leaped to, well, is there something going on with these two? Like, is she planning on leaving Andy for David? But there's a little bit more to that, as it turns out. And later on, Lee lays out what's been going on and why she's planning on leaving Andy, and exactly how she's planning on leaving Andy, because it's revealed through flashbacks. Then this is from Lee's point of view anyway, and the story she tells Darby, it's worth pointing out that it's not 100% concrete. But she says to Darby then Andy has become like an obsessive father when it comes to Boomer. Is it Zuma? No, it's Zuma, I think. His child, like, he's just become overly obsessed, and it's led to him becoming violent when it comes to Lee. There's a scene where he smacks her in this story by Lee. So Lee tells her that she came up with a plan for her and Zuma to leave the country and go to Canada, go to like this cabin in Canada and start a new life. So she lays out this plan, and this is the answer to Darby's question about why she's got a different passport with a different identity, and also why she's got a wig. And I really enjoyed this flashback because of it. It paints a good picture, and it's also a clever little scheme that we watch Lee hatching, because we find out that she picked out a woman who had a totally different appearance to her, like she's got dark hair, so that explains the wig. And also she finds out that I think it's her driving license was about to expire or something, so she picked someone who she could just renew the license in their name, and yeah, so she stole that person's identity as a way to leave the country with her son. And she gets to the cabin, but unfortunately Andy is there waiting. And it's nicely shot because we see her going up to the cabin, she's smiling, and she sees like her friend there waiting for her. But the twist is then he's talking to someone, and it turns out that someone is Andy, and he turns around. And later on, when they're on the plane back, Andy says to her, "You can leave, but Suma stays." And once again, that sort of goes to his obsession, like how that's all he seems to care about. And one of the reasons why Lee decided to try and leave Andy and take the son was because she believed that his intentions is to, once he's built like this underground cabin, to take them down there and to keep them there forever. So that's her concern. So she felt she had to do this. So that's the reveal really when it comes to that stuff. And it does potentially give Andy a motivation for killing Bill, because it turns out Bill, Rohan and also David had been helping Lee try to escape and leave Andy, and that's what the boat was for, like the boat that Darby and Sean found a couple of episodes ago. So the boat was so that they could get off the island, and obviously Rohan was involved with that. So it does paint the picture then it could be Andy. But Lee, at one point, because she tells Darby that Andy invited her, and he also invited Bill, and so this seems to be a way to like set things up. But Lee says that she approached Bill not long after he arrived, and that's when she seeked out his help, because they already knew each other, obviously. But she does say to Darby she doesn't think it's Andy who killed Bill, because she thinks that would lead back to him. Like it would be a pretty dumb move to kill the person you invited. So there's some logic to that, and because it's pointing so heavily to Andy at the moment, that makes me think that there is another twist and that the kill is going to be someone else. Also, I think this explains quite nicely some of the stuff going on with Andy, and it works quite nicely for the themes of the show, and also it works nicely because it means you can have this side of things be explained, but then there's still another big reveal with whoever the killer is. So I'm sort of sold on it not being Andy, it being someone else. So, and of course there's always the possibility that Lee is not telling the whole truth, then, because later on when we see Andy in the episode and we get like the cliffhanger, it could still be revealed next week that he's more innocent than Lee is letting on, or he could certainly be guilty of some of the things she's saying, but at the same time he may not be the ultimate villain. There's possibilities there, so that's exciting stuff. There's another nice suspenseful moment with Oliver, because they get locked in, that being Lee and Darby, because they're planning to go and find David, and it seems as though it could be another technical fault, but they get locked in, so they think, yeah, someone's locked them in, and then Oliver appears out of nowhere in the room, and then it's a good moment of suspense. And of course he knows David, they've had like a relationship, and he says to them, we need to go to my room because I'm the only person who isn't being looked for. So we should be safe there. And they go to the room, and it turns out he's got a bunch of Bill's stuff there. So Darby starts like wading through the evidence, which again is a fun little scene when it comes to her investigating things. And it turns out he's got Darby's book, and that seems crucial in the episode, not just when it comes to the past, but when it comes to the present and what exactly went on that night. Because Darby figures out or sees that there's a lot of fingerprints, and she can almost trace them around the room and figure out the secrets of events. So she comes to the conclusion then someone was about to kill Bill, and that's why he panicked and injected himself with morphine. And it seems as though he had then got the book, and he sort of like hit himself on like the shelf or something, and then fell over and was kind of on the verge of dying. But he got the book for a reason, and he turned it to the final chapter. And this works thematically really nicely, because the final chapter is the one that contains the information about what exactly happened in the serial killer's basement all those years ago that was set up in the first episode. And Darby mentions how she never reads that chapter, but Oliver, it's a good line actually, because he says, well, there's blood on those pages though, you've got to read it. And once again, I like, because there's a couple of different meanings to that almost. So she reads the chapter, and what goes down when it comes to the basement, when the killer comes in, finds them, they've found his wife buried, and they start saying the name is then he actually shot himself, he didn't shoot them. So that's kind of what went down there. You get a blood splatter all over Bill, and he starts freaking out. Once again, we see that Darby is the more composed of the two, because she starts, like, she hugs him first of all and says, I need your help. And she starts making it look as though they literally just found the bodies here, then there wasn't anything else going on with them. Because then she runs to her neighbour's house and says, I've found a couple of dead people, says who it is, and the neighbour is taken aback to hear that, oh my god, the wife has been there all along, like buried, and to find out that her neighbour is obviously like a killer, because she had no idea. And then Darby rings the authorities, says she's found these bodies, but also says, I've got the evidence to prove that this guy Frank is a serial killer and he's killed people in different states. So there's all that. Once again, it's telling, as I said, just how composed Darby is compared to Bill, and which is partly understandable, because he does get all the blood splattered on him, and that really is like great symbolism. So later on, they have an emotional scene together, Bill and Darby, but it seems like the final straw in Bill leaving is then Darby starts talking about the killer and what was in his mind. Like, was he always going to kill himself, or did he decide on the spur of the moment? And Bill gets really upset, because he starts talking out about, why are you trying to make this guy more special than he is? Why are you trying to get inside his head? And he does this great speech about him like being like faulty data or something like that, he says, and he says different things, but just then he's kind of the worst of society almost. He's like everything bad in the world, and he uses like certain metaphors which links it to the theme of technology, and it's consistent with Bill's worldview that we've set up in other episodes, so that works really well. and just how critical he is of this kind of thing. And another side of it I like is then Darby's interest in it and fascination in this guy Frank. I think goes to the modern fascination with true crime and serial killer culture, where even though we are repulsed by these people, we are also interested in getting inside their heads to try and figure out exactly what they were thinking and what makes them tick. I'm not saying everybody, but there's definitely a craving for this sort of thing right now, and there's always been a morbid interest around it. So I think that's another side to this scene. Then Darby represents that, and that's something Bill just can't get his head around. And so he leaves the next morning, which is a scene we've already seen, and he leaves like the message on the mirror, and Darby just reliving that has like a breakdown. So that's like a whole cathartic sort of thing where Lee and Oliver comfort her and says you needed to get that off your chest. And I don't think there's a big reason behind what Bill did, like going to the book and opening it at that page, and it's symbolic that he bled over it, of course, because of what happened in the past. But I think I just read it as he wanted Darby to approach that side about what actually happened, like actually face up to it, like she's shut it off for a long time maybe and has been in denial about. So that's how I read it. Then he just wanted Darby to confront that side of herself and make peace with the past, perhaps. But Lee also has a theory then, because of some of the language Bill was using, and this is something Oliver repeats, they're both convinced that he sort of knew that the serial killer was a hacker, because it's brought up by Darby in the past, and the serial killer must have tracked her on like the Reddit page, and that's kind of what he was using to carry out the schemes. So Lee believes that Bill was making this point about him being a hacker, and that he was trying to sort of communicate that to Darby in the language he was using. So we end up with like the three of them all talking about who the suspects could be, because as I said, Lee is convinced that Andy's too smart to have killed Bill. So, but they go through the suspects, and this is just one of these like things, once again relating it to this kind of whodunit type show. But I can't remember if it's Lee or Oliver. One of the two point the finger at maybe Romaine because she knew Bill well and had certain differences, and also it's brought up her background in her hometown in China, like that points to maybe some motivations. Darby is still convinced that it is Andy because she thinks he has like the biggest motivation of any to do it. And then the other person who is brought up is the nanny, because she seems to have some involvement and seems to be quite hands-on, and it was her morphine that was used. But I still think Todd is a possibility. I'm not saying I'm sold on it, but I think he is a possibility. But the cliffhanger of the episode anyway is because they've been waiting for David to come back, and David shows up at the door and he's beaten up, and we see Todd and then also Andy appear with him, and that's kind of the cliffhanger. Then they come in and they've got David, and you've got a very sinister delivery of the line, "That's my wife," from Andy. So Yeah, that's a good cliffhanger. Sets up things very nicely for the final episode next week, I should say. So I'm excited. The only other small thing was then at one point Darby shows Lee and Oliver the footage from her, then she got on her tablet from that night, and that someone appears to have erased themselves from it. And one detail is then, because I think it's Oliver says, then it could just be like a trick of the lights or something like that, or because he says, well, why wouldn't they just erase themselves altogether? And Darby says, like, just erase that part of the footage altogether rather than just erase them. And Darby says, well, it's because you would notice a time jump. So that's why that whoever it is very clever. But yeah, we get the dramatic ending with David being caught by Bill. Sorry, not Bill, by Andy and by Todd, and them coming in. So yeah, it's going to be very interesting next week. I'm going to suspect that there's going to be a little bit more to it when it comes to whoever killed Bill. And then you may well see Andy try and play on, can you really trust Lee? And try and paint her at least as being uncredible. But we'll see. We'll see. This is a good setup episode, though, for the finale. I think one of the things I like about it is that it's not too grandiose when it comes to the answers that it gives us, assuming they're all accurate. But I think they may well be, or at least most of it. So I quite like that they do keep it relatively simple and also consistent, and that it has a nice bit of logic to it, but also it's not too cliched. It's not like too predictable or anything. It's just nice little tweaks that makes it very kind of satisfying, and you've got stuff to chew on as well. So yeah, really strong penultimate episode, I'll say. That's my thoughts on A Murder at the End of the World. So episode 6 now. Let me know your thoughts in the comments below. Like and subscribe as always. Share me out on social media and support me on patreon.com/borednow for just $1 a month. But thanks for listening and goodbye.